Hello everyone and welcome to Lockdown Tuesday. This is Sky. Hope you guys are having an amazing and wonderful week. Today, I've almost drank everything already because I was so thirsty. I only have a little bit left, which I probably have to drink right now. This is an iced latte. What kind of drinks you guys have with you right now? Just kind of shoot down in the rooms to see what kind of drinks you have. Some of you might have a matcha latte, frappuccinos or whatever it is, or bubble teas. All right, so something new I want to do right now is there's a lot of people that come into the room a little bit early, so I want to do some shout outs before we start. So shout out to the twinsies, Jason 1 and Jason 2, Yanlan and Lilia in Germany. Thank you so much for joining us early. I'm going to make sure to do these shout outs every single time. Guess what, guys? You're on the internet. Woo! All right. So today, what are we going to do? We're doing the story of Jacob. Okay, and today's story is called Problem After Problem. And I'm sure that everyone can relate to this already because we've all got problems, right? We got some major problems in our life all the time. Okay, so everyone grab your drinks, whatever's left of it, sit back and relax, and we're going to have a time learning about life and how it's relevant to us through the story of Jacob. All right, so let's begin. So, who is Jacob? Super famous character in the Old Testament time. His father was Isaac, which his father was Abraham, who's the father of faith. So, Jacob, okay, his father was Isaac, and this dude, from in the stomach, he had a twin brother, and his twin brother's name was Esau. And both of them were fighting ever since they were in the stomach. Okay, so they were twins born literally at the same time. Now, how can you be born at the same time? It doesn't mean like both heads came out at the same time because that would be crazy, right? So what happened was Esau came out first, but Jacob was holding his heel and they came out together, like kind of like, you know, that game that has the monkeys, the plastic monkeys that carry each other up, that kind of thing. So both of them came out at relatively the same time. But the thing you got to know back then is, it's not so much today, is being the firstborn child is a huge thing. You know how huge it is? That if you're the firstborn child, you know after the father dies, half the inheritance goes to the firstborn, and the rest of the kids split the other half. That's how big it is. The blessing comes down upon them, huge and big deal. So what happens is, one day, his brother Esau, who's a hunter, comes back from hunting game. He's so tired, he's famished, he's hungry, he's starving, and he says, "Hey dude, Jacob, you're my twin brother. Come on, we're brothers. How about you give me some of that stew? I'm hungry." And he says, "Hey, dude, can't just give it to you. Nothing in life's free. So, give me your birthright. Sell me your birthright, and I'll give you the stew." And of course, Esau's like, "Dude, what good is my birthright if I'm dead? Just take it." And then he sells his birthright for a bowl of stew. So, later on, when it comes to the blessing that the firstborn is supposed to receive, Jacob, following the instructions of his mother, deceives his father to get the blessing that his brother Esau was supposed to get. Now, what eventually happens? Esau finds out and he's pissed. And what happens is he wants to kill his brother. So Jacob, on behest of his mother, runs away to his uncle Laban's house. And when he goes to his uncle Laban's house, cool thing happens there is he falls in love with his cousin. Gross, I know. But back then it was okay. So his cousin's name, actually, I don't want to say cousin because that already sounds gross. The girl's name was Rachel. And it says in the Bible she was beautiful and had a nice figure. Go figure. So what happens is he agrees with his uncle, gross, right, to work 7 years for his cousin, Rachel, okay? I gotta get out of my mind, right? Because I'm thinking about my cousins right now. So either way, right? So he's got to work 7 years for his uncle to get Rachel. Now what happens is, on the night of the wedding, what happens, it's nighttime, remember there's no electricity back then, and instead of getting Rachel, he gets the older daughter, which is Leah. So can you imagine that, waking up in the morning, and it's not the girl that you thought you were with, okay? So he wakes up like, "What's going on?" He's like, "Dude, it doesn't work that way here. You have to marry the older one before the younger one." So what happens is, he has to work another 7 years to get the girl that he wants. Eventually works 7 years and gets Rachel. Now, after this, he works for another 6-7 years for his uncle, and then he's heading back home. And on the way back home, he sends some servants to talk to his brother Cain. And he says, Cain, oh no, sorry, not Cain, Esau, right? And he says, hey, Esau, your brother's coming back. And he's like, all right, I'm going to go meet him. So how does he meet his brother? He takes 400 armed men with him to go meet Jacob. So the question is he over it yet? It's been over 20 years, and it doesn't look like he's over it. So what happens is, on the way to meet up with his brother Esau with 400 armed men, Jacob is scared out of his mind, and what he does is he meets someone along the way, and he starts wrestling with him. I'm not sure why you'd start wrestling with someone all day, but he starts wrestling with him. Later he realizes it's God. He just wrestled with God, and he won. Crazy as that sounds. Well, he beat God. I don't know if that's possible, but he beat God. And then he gets blessed, and then they live happily ever after, and Esau doesn't kill Jacob, and everything is all hunky-dory, and everything is fine. Now, this is a very interesting story because, like we said, the title of today's message or talk is Problem After Problem. And we're going to go over 3 different problems, and we're going to see how Jacob handled each of these problems or how these problems were handled. And we're also going to look at how we can solve the problems we have in our lives in 3 different ways. First verse of the day is Psalm chapter 119. I know there's 119 chapters, pretty crazy, and the verse is 105. So this is like the longest the longest chapter in all the Bible is Psalms 119. And this is not even the last verse. It goes even further than this. Psalms 119, 105. And what it says is, your word is a lamp for my feet and a light on my path. Now, what am I basically saying with this first verse of today is, it's saying that the words or the Bible that we're reading right now, it does help our life, right? It is something that it's like a revelation. It opens our eyes to something new. So through today's story of Jacob, I hope that everyone can learn how to solve these problems that we're going through in our life. Problem after problem after problem. Now, first problem we're going to take a look at is help from others. Okay? This is about getting help from other people. Right? It's like, well, what does that mean? Well, what happens is, one of the big problems is he actually buys the birthright of the firstborn from his brother. But the bigger issue is not so much that he bought the birthright, but it's actually collecting the birthright. Why? Because the father, who's very, very traditional, will only bless the firstborn. Only bless the firstborn. So what did he do? Well, Jacob at this time, you have to know that he's very, very young. He's got no power. He can't just say to his dad, hey, Dad, I bought it for a bowl of stew. It's not going to work. So the person he got help from was his mother. And the next verse we'll look at is Genesis chapter 27, verse 8. And basically, what does the mother say? Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. And he listens to the T exactly what his mom says. Okay? Remember, this is not some stranger off the street. This is not just some friend who has no knowledge of the situation. One of the things that you might bring up right now, but I just want to clear this out of the way first, is like, but he deceived his own father. And the answer is, he was helped from the mother. Okay? And the thing you really need to know, and we could talk about this even more deeply at another time, is the mother and the father, they know the situation. They do. And even before the birthright was stolen, they already knew the situation. And that's why you have to look at Genesis 25, 23. And basically, when the babies were in the stomach, you know what God said to Rachel? Is it Rachel? No, I'm sorry. Rebecca. His mother's Rebecca. What the Lord said to Rebecca was, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger, which means that God even told both Rebecca and Isaac before anything that the younger was going to be the stronger one, that the older was going to serve the younger. So getting help from the mother, she was very knowledgeable in the situation, and it is something you have to understand is Isaac should have known, the father knew already, but he wouldn't do it. And this is why he needed help from the mother. And the thing you have to understand here is there are some problems, especially when we're young in anything or young in life too, we do need to get help from other people, right? Problems are not always resolved by yourself. And I'm sure that you guys hear that all the time. It's like, do it by yourself, man. Just do it by yourself. What's wrong with you? Even if no one helps you, you go, no. Sometimes in life, you need help, right? One of the first ways we can see, especially when you're young, through this story is Jacob actually needed help. He really did. As someone that young, he couldn't influence his father, and actually, he didn't even fully know the situation. And it's true in our lives too. There are many times we don't know the full situation. We don't actually know what is going on. We don't have full knowledge. We don't have wisdom. And this is why we need to instill the help from others around us who are knowledgeable and who are wise in the situation. So this first thing we're looking at, first of the three problems, yes, there was a problem getting the blessing, but he received help from his mother, or someone on the outside needs to help you, okay? So that's the first one. Let's move over into the second problem. Now, the second problem is resolving ignorance, right? Now, this is about you have to learn from ignorance. And this is kind of interesting because this is like, as he's growing in life, he moves to his uncle's house and he finds a wife that he wants. And what happens? He spends 7 years working for this woman, and then on the night of the wedding, he's with his wife at night, and when he wakes up in the morning, it's the wrong girl. Like, that would never happen today, but back then, it happened. Right? The uncle gave the wrong woman, and can you imagine how shocked he was in the morning? He's like, oh my love, right? He just freaks out because it's not even Rachel. It's the older sister that wasn't as beautiful and wasn't as lovely shaped as the Bible says, right? So, what does this mean? Well, let's see what the answer from his uncle is, because there's got to be a reason, right? You got to think about this carefully. It's his uncle. His uncle is not trying to, deceive him. If you look in Genesis chapter 29, verse 26, here's the answer. His uncle replied, "It's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." Which means what? It means that he had to understand his ignorance. He had to know the customs of the land. And we have to also understand here is, a lot of times, problems happen in our lives because we just don't know. We've never done it before. It's the first time in the situation. You guys have to look back at the first times we did these talks. It's nothing close to this, right? There's no green screen. The clothes I wore, the things that we did, all those are different things. Well, of course, I was in lockdown hair, so I couldn't cut my hair for 4 months, which was a little bit crazy. That's a little bit different, right? But if you look at a lot of different things, even when we started this YouTube channel, so many things we don't know. So many things we didn't even know how to do. And in the same way, too, a lot of the problems stem from, just like Jacob, he's learning along the way. And if he knew, then he would know the custom of the land, right? But here's the good thing that Jacob did, and here's the good thing that we can learn from Jacob also is, once he understood what was, the custom of the land, what did he do? Then he went on and resolved it. And he worked another 7 years to get Rachel instead. There wasn't complaining. Right? There wasn't him going, oh, how dare you? Instead, he worked with everything that he had a great time, right? And he said the 7 years working for Rachel passed by like a day. Time doesn't pass by unless you are enjoying it, unless you're having fun, unless you have this great hope ahead of you, right? It's like this. If you're suffering for an entire month, but at the end of the month, someone's going to give you $10,000, I'm sure you guys are going to look at that $10,000 and say, you know what? It's okay. Why? We look ahead into the future, and it's a greater hope that we see. The second way of resolving is, well, what happens is the problem stems from our ignorance. We learn from our ignorance the things that we don't know, and we have to resolve it. And that's the second thing, the second type of problem that was made and resolved by Jacob at this time. See, we have to understand is, problems are going to happen just because we don't know from our own ignorance, and we have to be the ones that resolve it by doing 3 things. Number 1 is acknowledge. Acknowledge the ignorance that you have, that, oh man, I made a mistake, I didn't know. Second thing is understand. Right? Understand it's no one's fault, right? It's just because you didn't know. Understand it's no one's fault. You acknowledge it, oh, my mistake. Second one is, I understand. It's not anyone's fault. Because if you start blaming it on people, you're going to have a terrible time. You understand it, and then the third thing you do is you have to resolve it, right? You got to resolve it at the end. Okay? Now that brings us to the third one. And this is a very, very interesting one because a lot of people, when I was a pastor and a missionary, tons of people ask me this question all the time. It's about wrestling, right? Wrestling and struggling to resolve and doing it on your own, right? And what happens here is, remember we said that his brother Esau, he's still upset. How do you know? He's coming with 400 armed men to meet his brother. Now, why would you need 400 men to meet your brother? What, is it just because you're popular, you have tons of friends? You don't do it because of that. You're doing it because you're still pretty upset about it even 20 years after. So if you're upset 20 years later, you know that something's gonna go down, and guess what? The only thing that Jacob had 400 of was sheep, which means he's not gonna have a good battle. So what happens is, he's scared to death. And there's no mother there to help him. There's no uncle there to look over him. He's basically by himself. And you see that when he's on his way to meet his brother, in Genesis chapter 32, verse 24, it's a very interesting thing it says here is, Jacob was left alone. And then, out of nowhere, some dude comes to wrestle with him all day. Like, you got to think about this, it's kind of weird. He's by himself, and then some man just starts wrestling with him. There's no reason. He's just going to come in and wrestle with him. And the crazier part is, like, think about this. He finds out it's God. Oh, is this what God does normally? He's like, hey, you know what? I think I'm just going to go wrestle with some human beings. And do you actually think that God wrestles people for blessings? Do you actually think that God loses? Like, think about, like, if you look in verse 25, the next verse, you know what it says? The next verse says, when the man, it's talking about God, saw that he could not overpower him. You got to think about how crazy that sounds. God realized God could not overpower Jacob. Does that really make any sense? Number one is, like, that would be crazy if you had to fight God to get blessings. Why? No one would get blessings. But then we look at this verse and it's like, well, no, God can lose. You're like, how the heck does God lose? What does it mean? Is God really wrestling people for blessings? Does it really make sense? He's wrestling people for blessings? You see that when you look all throughout the scriptures, the one thing you have to understand is, whenever we want a blessing, whenever we're asking for something, we don't wrestle with our body. What do we wrestle with? We wrestle with our hearts. We wrestle with our minds. In what? Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 16 through 18. Very, very important verse. It says, rejoice always, pray continually, and give thanks in all circumstances. You know what that means? Do you know how hard it is to give thanks in all circumstances? Why? Because just like the story of Jacob, there is problem after problem after problem after problem. It's hard. Whenever God wants us to receive a blessing from him, he says pray. And don't just pray. Pray continuously no matter what the situation is. You know where the greatest wrestling happens? The greatest wrestling happens is with ourselves, actually. We're wrestling in our hearts and our minds. Why? Because haven't you guys ever had that prayer where at a certain point you're like, I don't think God's going to answer it. And you're wrestling. You're wrestling. I don't know. Does he really care about this? And there's so many people that don't pray continuously, but they stop somewhere along the way. And what happens is we get overpowered, right? We get overpowered with like discouragement. We get overpowered because I don't know if I can do this. What we have to realize is that wrestling with God is that time of prayer. To struggle, no one struggles physically with God. No one's going to do that. And on top of it, someone's going to overpower God? It doesn't work that way. Jacob was alone. And God's not just going to go like, hey, you know what? Let's wrestle. That's a weird God, right? There's no reason for it. Why is he wrestling? He's wrestling. You got to think about this. The thing, when you want a blessing from God, it is in prayer. And what do? We struggle. We struggle and we wrestle with God to get that blessing. And we have to understand is, that's this final time. And I'll give you a very interesting thing is, right after this wrestling with God and he wins, Jacob's name gets changed to Israel. And what Israel means? It means to wrestle with God, to struggle with God. That's what his name means. That's what the nation of Israel means, to wrestle and struggle. And especially when it comes to people of faith, the thing that we wrestle, struggle the most is that faith, that belief, and that prayer that we have constantly with God. And from that prayer of never ceasing, continuous thanksgiving in all situations, there was no other choice but to be blessed. And in the end of it, what happens? The blessing comes, and when he meets with Esau, he's able to have peace. And this is how everything was able to work out. And you guys have to understand with yourselves too, a lot of the times, especially when it comes to this last problem, is some of these issues is something that you have to resolve on your own. You really do. They're not issues for other people. These are issues that belong to you, right? And that's between you and God, right? It's not saying there's a problem between you and God, but it's with you and God working on this together to overcome these situations in life. Right? If you think about it in kind of a larger picture, think about the three problems. One is in his youth, and he has to get someone on the outside to help him. Makes sense, right? Because when you're young, you need help from the outside. Someone older, more wiser, right? That's why we have parents. That's why we have uncles. We have pastors, like me, right? We have pastors. We have friends that are older, that are more wiser, been in the situation. And then when he starts to grow up a little bit more, he works for another 7 years, which means he's probably in his 20s now. And as he's growing, he's learning about life. And he realizes about his ignorance. He learns from his ignorance, and he fixes his ignorance, learns from it, acknowledges it, understands it, and then he resolves it himself. He's learning. And finally, when he becomes mature, you see in Jacob's life, when it came down to serious problems, he didn't run to his mom, right? He didn't run to his parents. Oh, help me, Mom, right? He didn't run to his uncle that was like his guardian at that certain time. There's a time in life, too, when we have to take things on our own. And we have to pray. You've got to pray it out. And you got to wrestle it out until you get that blessing from God. And I hope that all of us here, when we see these three things, ultimately in the end, in order for us to become mature and grow up, God wants us to be someone who takes control of our life. Right? The more and more you see the three stages, the more and more you see the control is in the parents' hands, right? In the beginning, yeah, your parents have responsibility. They have the control. But as you grow up and you're under your uncle's house, then what happens is you're learning of how to become independent and learning how to take control. And the last one is when you finally mature, you learn how to take control of your own life. Does that mean you're in control of everything? No. Because even Jacob wasn't in control, that he had to pray to God for it too. So I hope that us too, we can learn that, we're going to have problems come all the time. And there's always going to be different ways to resolve them. And I hope that you guys can see that through the story of Jacob, you can see all three of these major ways to resolve these problems that you're going through right now. Last verse I end off with today is Hebrews chapter 5, verse 13 and 14. The reason I'm saying this is just as Jacob grew throughout his life and he became more and more independent and he became someone who resolved problems on his own, the scriptures tell us, anyone who lives on milk, which is like a baby, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness, but solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. What does that mean? It means that even in our faith, in your life, you need to grow. We can't always be, oh God, help me. Oh God, oh Mom, help me. Oh friends, come help me. And it's always asking people to help. No, we have to ask. We have to learn about our own mistakes, and we have to grow and become independent too. All right? So I hope you guys enjoyed today's story, problem after problem, the story of Jacob. And that all of you, if you want to see some more of these Lockdown Tuesday videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Espresso with Sky. And we're doing a live stream right now on it. You can see it every single week. So if you haven't, make sure you hit subscribe and click the bell. Also, for those of you who don't know, this is a free ministry for everyone, and if you want to support this ministry, we have a Patreon account, so you guys can support us on there, and the Patreon address, the link will be sent out there too. And remember, this Saturday at 1 p.m., what's going to happen? This Saturday at 1 p.m., those of you who want to go deeper into the Word, we're going to have Bible study open to everyone. I'm telling you right now, it is open. Straight up open. Those of you sign up, even if you've been here for 10 years, 5 years, 1 year, it's going to be opened up to everyone. So it's going to be Saturday at 1 p.m. and there's a sign up form, a link that's going to be put into your comment room. Cool. All right. Which means what? It means it's time for question and answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the last sip of this watered down melted iced latte, and you guys, I'll give you a few moments to write your questions down. One second, I'm going to blow my nose. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, but All right, guys, let's go into the question and answer. All right, question and answer. So let's take a look. We're going to go all the way to Singapore, and there's James in Singapore, and he says, when faced with a problem, how do I know if I should get help from others or keep trying to do things on my own? Okay, great question, James. James in Singapore. So you're facing a problem, and how do I know? Like, for instance, we looked at the situation as like, when you're young and when you're growing, you have ignorance, and also when you're independent and fully mature, right? Now, the thing is, in life, we're not going to be fully mature in everything that we do. Like, for instance, if you think about it, if you get an internship and it's your first day on the job, then for that job, you're like a child in the job because you know nothing about it, which means you do need help from other people, right? So even like my example is when you're at your first job, first day, you're going to be asking people for help all the time. They're going to be like, what do? I don't know what to do. And they'll say to you, turn on the computer. It's like, oh, thank you, right? But, and then later on, as you start to grow more and more, you start to do things on your own and you start to make mistakes, right? In your job, you start making mistakes like, oh, darn it, I did this. Oh, shoot. And you learn, someone comes and helps you out. They're like, oh, and you're like, oh, that's what I did wrong. And you start learning from the mistakes. And then later, you become very proficient in your job. And in those cases, you're able to troubleshoot and hack everything and start helping others in that way too, right? So for James, you kind of have to look at yourself at what stage you are in what you're doing. It doesn't just mean that because you're 40 years old, 50 years old, you're good at everything. No, there's a lot of things you become like a child at because it's your first time doing it. So you have to kind of discern those things really well to see what stage you're at in those things. Cool? All right, let's move on to the next one. Next one says, it's from Paywen from KL. Why do we need to wrestle to get blessings from God? Can't God just give the blessings to us? That is a good question because, don't you think like, hey, if you love someone, like if someone loves you, isn't it better to just give? But let me give you an example of just kind of in real life, if you just give things to people if they don't deserve it, right? Like for instance, what happens to a child if the parents give them everything they want? Like everything they want. There's no effort put in. They don't learn the value of the things they have, but they just get everything they want. Then we know that these children turn into spoiled brats. Why? Because they don't understand the value of what they're getting. Because everything just comes to them so freely and so easily, right? One of the things you have to understand is God, because He's created us, He knows what human beings are like. And one of the things we have to understand is, God wants us to. Why does He want us to struggle and struggle and wrestle for these things? Is because we need to know the value. Because one of the things I know for sure is, if you give something to someone who doesn't value it, they just mistreat it and they throw it away. Then how do you feel as the one giving it to them, that you gave them something valuable and they just throw it aside? What would you think? You'd be thinking, there's no way I'm going to give this to them anymore, right? And in the same way too, God understands human beings more than we understand ourselves. And we have to realize, now, one of the things is God's teaching us value. We should value it. And things should, if you think about it in this way, if God is really, really fair, then people should get things when they deserve it. Because that's fair. That's fair, right? So I hope that answers the question, Paywen from KL. Let's go over to Chloe. Chloe in PJ. Why do I always feel like running away from my problems? Okay, so this is a question that a lot of people are probably feeling like this. Why? Well, why do people like to run away from problems? Because it's easy, right? If you think about it carefully, in the very, very short term, running away from your problems is the easiest thing to do. One thing human beings really, really hate is getting into problems. Like, for instance, don't you hate it like when you get into an argument with someone and then you guys go home and then you have to say sorry and then you're like, kind of like, oh, should I call them? Oh, no, they should call me. No, I should call them. Oh, no, and we kind of sit there just wondering, should I call, should I not call, should I call, right? People don't, it's hard. Going through struggles is hard. However, the thing you have to understand is we avoid it because it feels like it's going to be so hard. However, long term, it is far better to resolve it now than later. Because the one thing I tell you for sure is this: the longer you wait, the bigger it gets. Haven't you ever had this before? You get into a fight with your friend, and then if you don't resolve it right away, you know what happens? The thing that happens is the longer you wait, the more you talk to other people and the more angry you get, and the more angry you get, the bigger the problem gets, and the bigger the problem gets, the more you don't want to talk to that person. It even gets to the point where you don't even want to be in the same area as them. That when your friends hang out, it's like, hey, what's going on tonight? Oh, you're going to come tonight? Is Chloe coming? Yeah, she is. Oh, no, I'm not going to go out. That's what happens. When the faster you resolve it, the smaller the problem is going to be, the smaller it is, right? When it's just like your fight is like, you know what? I'm so stupid. I love you because you're like my best friend. Oh my gosh, you're my best friend too. And they start like loving each other even more. It's better to do it faster. But yeah, it's true because people don't like to go through hard things, and that's why it's easy to run away. All right, let's go over to Aya. Aya. Oh, in Japan. Aya in Japan. What is it like to have mature faith? Okay. Now, mature faith, what does it mean? Well, one of the things that we saw in the story of Jacob was he is able to resolve things on their own. Like, remember, when you become more mature, you become more independent. And it's not just, it doesn't mean that you can never ask people for help, but being independent or being mature means that number one is that you can handle yourself in these situations regardless of how it goes. And secondly, you can discern situations really well so that you know when to ask or when to do it on your own. Right? You know when it's your own problem and something you need to resolve. Like, for instance, if you're a kid, how do you deal with breaking something in a store and you have to pay for it? You're like, Mom, help me, right? Because you broke something, so you get your mom to pay for it. But when you are mature and you grow up, you take care of it yourself. Like, no, I got it. No, I'll take care of it. Right? When you grow up, are you going to ask your mom to buy you a house? When you grow up, you're going to ask your dad to buy you a car? No. These are times where you do it on your own. You become mature and independent, also when it comes to faith. When you're young, someone is always feeding you. They're always the one asking you the questions to make you think deeper. They're always the one trying to bring you closer to God. But in faith, when you're becoming mature in faith, you're someone that even when you're by yourself, even when there's no one around, you can pray. Even when there's no one around, you can study the words deeply. Even when there's no one around, you can think about it much more clearly and draw closer to God, even if there's no one there, right? So the best way to do it, Aya, is to think about it in terms of physical too. Oh, physically mature people are like this. In the same way, mature people in faith should be like this. Great question, Aya from Japan. Let's move on to Jean. Jean in KL. Jean in KL asks, if I didn't ask for help and just keep it to myself, how can I get peace of mind? Well, that's a little bit, it really depends on what the problem is. Because if it's something that requires help, then you're not going to get peace of mind because it's going to be impossible to resolve. You know what I mean? Like an example I would give you is like if you have some problem with the courts, with the law, you need a lawyer because the lawyer knows the law. But if you do it by yourself, you're gonna mess yourself up, right? And you're never gonna get peace of mind, which means that you need to understand, first discern is, do I need help or do I not need help, right? Do I need it or not? Because some things do need help. Like I said before, is other parts of your life, you may, even if you're like 30, 40 years old, it doesn't mean you're mature in every aspect of life. Some parts you might not be as mature as you thought you would be in that area, which means you do need to get help, right? And to get peace of mind, it really depends. Is it something that needs someone else? Or this could be something that could be another topic for the bubble talks in the future is sometimes we can't forgive ourselves for certain things. And that's why you'll never get peace of mind, is because we don't forgive ourselves, or we can't, like, we feel guilty about something, even if it's resolved. But Gene, I would have to know a little bit more about what the actual situation was. Okay, let's move to HL in JB, in Malay, in Johor Bahru, JB. Okay, HL. Okay, when problems come, I will sometimes just try to avoid them, but that isn't the right way to curb the problem. How should I do when facing problems? I would say that one of the things that causes more problems is if you face the problem too quickly, as in you're still in an emotional state. And that does cause more problems, because if you're having some problem with someone but you're still in an emotional state, most of the times people in an emotional state do not handle problems very well, like really terribly, right? Which means that you'd have to sit down, look at the problem, and understand how you're going to have to deal with it and resolve it. And then the hardest part, I believe, is the actual contact, like saying, hey, can we talk? Hey, can we talk about this? I'm going to say that's one of the hardest things to do. And in the beginning, if it's a very difficult thing for you to contact that person, honestly, this is for another talk too, but it's sometimes good to have someone else, a third mediator, to kind of bring, to talk to the person and say, hey, this person wants to talk to you, and you can have someone to mediate the situation, someone you trust, someone that both sides trust, right? So, yeah, like, everyone wants to resolve it. The hardest part is, it's just that first step of calling them, or first step of saying, hey, let's talk. That is the hardest part, because you know that the moment you say that, you get really tense and nervous. You're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? But that is the most maturest and the best way to do it. But if you can't, this is not a bad thing either. It's good to find a third person or a mediator that can help you out with it. And I definitely recommend it. It's better to do it that way than not solving it at all. Okay? Thanks, HL. That's a really good question. I think it's the last question today from Jason. I'm not sure if it's Jason 1 or Jason 2. It's one of the Jasons, right? So it says, I realize that after having faith, it seems like there are more problems. Is that normal, and how can I counter it? And the answer is yes. All right, we're done. No, I'm just kidding. I'm like, you're a terrible pastor, right? But it's true. In the beginning, there'll be more problems. And I'll give an example, like I talked about work, right? When you start going to work for the first time, all there is are problems. What do I do first? What do I do second? I don't know. Oh no, something's happening. What do I do? What do I do? And because you're starting something new, in the beginning, it's just problems. I'm serious. It's just problems. You're like, well, I just came to faith. It's supposed to be better, but all I get is problems, right? And the answer is, in whatever you do in life, whenever you first start it, there's going to be problems first before anything else. But as you grow and as you mature, and finally when you become independent, what happens is, it becomes something you're very, very good at. So Jason, if you look at your job, or even at school or studying, if you're working, think about it. In the beginning, it's all problems. I don't know what to do. Oh, I'm nervous. What should I do? Oh no, something went wrong with the computer. What should I do next? Oh, the customer said this. Oh, what should I say next to them, right? But later on, when you have all the experience, what happens? You know exactly what to say. Exactly what to say, right? And you're so good and you're so proficient by that time that other people are asking you for help, which means that you're no longer having all these problems. But just like everything in life, in the beginning, tons of problems happen all the time. Jason 1, cool, Jason 1, right? Tons of problems are going to happen in the beginning, but just know that as you get better and better at it, then faith gets better, you get more blessings, and you understand it much more, and it's something that is much more fulfilling and satisfying as you get better. It's like work. When you first work, like I said before, the most satisfying part of work in the beginning is your paycheck, right? Oh, it's so hard. Oh, thank God for the paycheck. But later on, the satisfying part is when you are able to do things on your own and even help others, right? So, yeah, I understand. It's going to be hard in the beginning when you just start having faith, but it's okay. It's a normal thing, and you're going to go through the stages of the child growing and then maturity, just like Jacob did. And by the end of it, you'll be able to handle the problem.